Orc warrior falls into despair, watching her sister drown. What the village man did left her completely speechless. There are three kinds of silence in the world. The silence after battle, when the dust still hangs in the air and you count who's left standing. The silence of a forest before dawn, when even the animals know something is wrong. And the silence inside the chest of someone who's about to lose the only thing that still matters. Vraka knew the first two by heart. She was about to learn the third. They had been walking for 4 hours without rest when the Tescan River appeared between the trees, wide, dark, carrying that burnt tea color that autumn mud gives to northern waters. The current was visible even from a distance, rippling the surface in lazy diagonals that any experienced fisherman would have recognized as a trap. Vraka recognized it too, but she was distracted. 3 weeks had passed since the exile, and in that time she had developed the habit of calculating in silence. Supplies, routes, risks, distances. It was her way of not thinking about other things. About Elder Dirk's face when he pointed at her in front of everyone. About the collective sound of approval that followed. About the human girl, 4 years old, who would never know what it had cost someone to spare her life. Sari walked 2 steps ahead, barefoot as always, her feet finding the stones with a lightness Vraka had never managed to imitate. She had 18 winters and the carelessness of someone who had grown up believing her older sister would always fix everything. Her skin was a light green, almost the shade of new leaves after rain, and her amber eyes still held that untouched brightness that Vraka had lost somewhere in a battle she could no longer name. "Should we cross here?" Sari asked, stopping at the bank and looking to the other side with the expression of someone solving a simple problem. "Further down," Vraka answered. "There should be a shallower point." "Is it far?" "I don't know, but the current is strong here." Sari nodded, though her feet were already in the muddy bank, testing the ground's consistency with her toes. That was how she was. She listened and kept doing what she wanted anyway, not out of stubbornness, but out of a genuine confidence that the world had no real reason to hurt her. Vraka went to check the supplies for the second time that hour. It had been 3 hours earlier, in a small, nameless town they had crossed too quickly, that the problem had started. A boy of maybe 12 had tried to pick Vraka's pocket with fast fingers and poor technique. She had caught him by the collar with her right hand on pure reflex, without measuring the force, and her shoulder had protested with a dry, immediate pop that she felt all the way to her jaw. A sprain, probably muscle, painful but not serious. She had ignored it, the way she ignored everything that hurt. She had released the boy, checked her pocket, kept walking. Now, as she rummaged through the pack, using her left arm to do the work of both, her right shoulder throbbed with the dull persistence of something that hadn't been treated in time. She moved her fingers. They worked. She raised her arm slowly. It made it halfway before the pain tightened with real intention. Useless for swimming, probably useless for anything requiring both arms. It wasn't the moment to think about that. The sound came before she turned around. It wasn't a complete scream. It was the beginning of one, cut short by the impact with water. A short, heavy splash, and then the unmistakable noise of a current swallowing resistance. Vraka turned. The bank was empty. 2 meters into the river, Sari surfaced for half a second, arms opening and closing the wrong way, head tilted back, eyes wide with an expression Vraka had never seen on her sister before. Real fear, the fear of someone who understood too late. Then the current pulled her back under. Vraka was already running when the thought arrived. She threw her spear to the ground, reached the bank, raised her right arm to dive. Her shoulder refused. The pain was so sharp and so total that she choked on it, her knees nearly giving way. She tried again, with anger this time, forcing it, and the muscle locked into a spasm, trapping her arm midway like a jammed door. She wouldn't be able to swim a single meter like this. Sari resurfaced further downstream, her movements growing slower. Vraka stood at the bank with open hands. A warrior of 26 winters. Enough scars to account for 2 wars. exiled from her clan for having too much mercy, and now without enough mercy from her own body to save the one person who had chosen to stay by her side. She opened her mouth. The name came out broken. Sari. And that was all. There was nothing left she could do. For the first time since childhood, Vraka was completely, absolutely powerless. And the world kept turning without caring, and the river kept pulling, and the autumn sky was the wrong color for a day when someone is lost. That was when she heard the footsteps behind her. Heavy, fast, human. There are people who think before they act. They calculate the risk, weigh the cost, consider whether the outcome is worth the effort. In most situations, that kind of thinking is what separates the wise from the reckless. Edrin had never been that kind of person, not since the last time he stood at this river and thought too long. He had been cutting through the tree line with a bundle of unsplit wood balanced on his left shoulder, when he heard it, that half-second of a scream swallowed by water. He knew that sound. He had spent 4 years trying to forget it and had failed completely, so at least now it was useful. His body was moving before his mind had finished processing what his ears had caught. He broke through the last row of trees and took in the scene in a single glance. A woman at the bank, tall, broad-shouldered, green-skinned, one arm raised and useless at her side. An orc. That registered, and then immediately stopped mattering. Further out in the river, a smaller figure being dragged downstream, movements already losing their urgency in the way that drowning people's movements do when exhaustion begins to win. He dropped the wood. He didn't stop to remove his boots. He didn't look at the warrior woman again. He ran 3 steps and threw himself into the Tescan, the way he threw himself into most things that frightened him, without giving himself time to reconsider. The cold hit like a closed fist. This far north in late autumn, the river wasn't just cold. It was the kind of cold that informed you immediately and without diplomacy that you were not welcome. His boots filled with water and became weights. The current grabbed him sideways and he let it, angling his body the way his father had taught him 30 years ago on a river much calmer than this one. He could see her just ahead. The smaller orc, younger, lighter, her green skin stark against the dark water, her amber eyes open and terrified and fixed on nothing in particular, the way eyes get when the body is deciding whether to keep fighting. He reached her in 4 strokes. His arm went around her from behind, under her arms, locking across her chest the way you hold someone who might panic and pull you both under. She was lighter than he expected. She grabbed his forearm with both hands, and he felt her nails. Short, but sharp, dig in hard enough to draw blood, and he didn't mind at all. "I have you," he said, though he wasn't sure she could hear him over the water. "Stop fighting the current. Let me work." She didn't stop fighting immediately. Nobody ever did. But after a few seconds, something in her grip shifted from desperate clutching to something closer to trust, and that was enough. He swam them diagonally toward the bank, using the current instead of fighting it, aiming for a flat stretch of muddy shore 20 meters downstream. It took longer than he would have liked. His shoulder burned. His boots were still full of water and pulling him down, and he made a mental note to remove them next time, if there was a next time, before jumping into freezing rivers after strangers. His feet found the riverbed. He stood, pulling the girl up with him, and half-walked, half-dragged them both onto the bank before his legs decided they had done enough and folded underneath him. He went down on one knee in the mud, still holding her, making sure she didn't go down face first. She was coughing, hard, productive coughs that meant her lungs were working, which was the only thing that mattered. He tilted her forward, one hand on her back, and let her cough until the river was out of her. "There you go," he said quietly. "That's it. Keep going." He heard footsteps in the mud behind him, fast, uneven, one side heavier than the other. He turned his head. The warrior orc had run the 20 meters downstream along the bank to reach them. She was on her knees in the mud now, her good arm already reaching for the younger one, her face doing something complicated and private that Edrin decided not to look at directly. There are expressions people wear in moments like that which aren't meant to be witnessed by strangers. He turned his attention back to the girl. She swallowed water, but she's breathing, he said, keeping his voice level and practical. She needs warmth, dry clothes, something hot to drink. Silence from behind him. He glanced back. The warrior was staring at him with those amber eyes, the dark kind, the kind that had seen things, and her expression had shifted into something he couldn't immediately name. Not gratitude. Not quite. Something rawer than that, and more confused, like someone who had prepared themselves for a particular kind of world and was suddenly being handed evidence that they had miscalculated. Her right arm was pressed against her side at a careful angle. Injured, he noted, recently. That explained the open hands at the bank. "My name is Edrin," he said, because someone had to say something. "I live at the edge of Marek, 10 minutes that way." He tilted his head north. "My cabin has a fire and a spare room. You're welcome to both until she recovers." The warrior said nothing. The younger orc coughed one more time, then turned her head and found her sister's face with an immediacy that made it clear this was a reflex she had been practicing her whole life. "Vraka," she rasped. And the warrior, Vraka, finally moved. She pulled her sister close with her good arm, pressing the girl's head against her shoulder, and closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Edrin counted without meaning to. When she opened them again, the raw thing was gone, locked away somewhere efficient and out of sight. What was left was the face of someone making a calculation. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was low, accented, and entirely direct. She was looking at him the way people look at things they don't trust but can't afford to refuse. Edrin thought about the question for a moment. He could have said many things, that it was the right thing to do, that he wasn't the kind of man who stood and watched, that orc or human or anything else. A person drowning was a person drowning. Instead, he said the true thing, which was simpler than all of that. "I've stood at this river before and not moved fast enough," he said. "I wasn't going to do it again." He stood up, water pouring from his clothes, boots squelching in the mud. He picked up nothing, waited for nothing. He just started walking north, toward the tree line. After a moment, he heard 2 sets of footsteps follow. Chapter 3. The Cabin and the Silence. There are kinds of cold that fire can fix, and kinds that it can't. The cabin was small and honest about it. 1 main room, a stone fireplace that took up most of the eastern wall, a table with 2 chairs that didn't match, tools hanging in careful order near the door. It smelled like sawdust and burnt pine, and something faintly herbal that Vraka couldn't name. Edrin went straight to the fireplace without a word. Vraka stood in the doorway. She hadn't decided to come inside yet. Technically, she was still outside, 1 foot on the threshold, which meant she hadn't committed to anything. It was a small distinction, but she needed it. Sari had no such hesitation. She had walked in under Edrin's arm, dripping river water onto the floorboards, and was now sitting on the floor, closest to the fire, with her knees pulled to her chest, shivering in that deep, uncontrollable way that goes beyond cold into something the body does when it's been genuinely frightened. "You can come in," Edrin said, without turning around. "The door lets the heat out." Vraka stepped inside and closed it behind her. She stayed near the wall and watched him work. He moved around the cabin with the efficiency of someone who lived alone and had stopped wasting motion a long time ago. Blanket from a chest near the window, thick wool draped around Sari's shoulders without ceremony. A pot already hanging over the fire, water already heating. A second log added without fuss. He pulled one of the mismatched chairs close to the fire and looked at Sari. "Can you tell me your name?" "Sari," she said through chattering teeth. "Sari." He nodded like he was filing it away. "Any pain? Chest? Head? Just cold?" "That's the right answer." He almost smiled. Not quite. Just a small shift at the corner of his mouth that came and went before it fully formed. Then he turned to Vraka. His eyes went to her right arm first. The way she was holding it, the angle, the stillness of it, the look of a man who noticed things without making a performance of noticing. "That shoulder needs to be looked at." "It's fine." "It's not," he said. Simply. No argument in his voice, just the flatness of someone stating weather. When the water boils, I'll make something for her fever. After that, if you'll let me, I'll check the shoulder. Vraka said nothing. He took that as neither yes nor no, and went back to tending the fire. She stood against the wall of a stranger's cabin, in a village that had no reason to want her, watching a human man take care of her sister with the quiet competence of someone who had done this before, or had wished once that he'd had the chance to. She didn't know which yet, but she stayed. There are people who help because they expect something in return. Edrin was not one of them. Vraka was still figuring out what to do with that. The water boiled. Edrin made the tea without measuring anything, dried herbs from a small clay pot, a piece of something dark and woody that he broke with his thumb, a pinch of something that smelled sharp and medicinal. He handed the cup to Sari with both hands, the way you hand something to someone you're being careful with. Sari took it and wrapped her fingers around the warmth, like it was the most valuable thing she'd been given in weeks. It probably was. Vraka watched from the wall. She had slid down at some point and was now sitting on the floor with her back against the wood, good arm resting on her knee. The right one kept close to her ribs. The throbbing had settled into a steady, negotiable pain. She was managing it. Edrin pulled the second chair around and sat facing her. Not close, just close enough. "I'm going to look at the shoulder," he said. "Not asking you to trust me, just asking you not to hit me with the other one." Sari made a small sound that might have been a laugh. Vraka said nothing, which he apparently decided was permission. He crouched in front of her and reached for the shoulder with slow, announced movements, the way you approach something that could still bolt. His fingers found the joint, through the fabric of her tunic, pressing in careful increments, reading the damage by feel. It hurt. She kept her face still. "Muscle, not the joint," he said. "You're lucky. Hurts more but heals faster." He sat back. "I have a cloth brace. It'll hold it in place so you stop aggravating it every time you move." He stood and went to a small chest near the wall. "You've done this before," Vraka said. It wasn't a question. "Carpentry," he answered, coming back with a strip of sturdy linen. "I've reset my own fingers twice. Shoulders are not so different." He applied the brace efficiently, wrapping the joint and pinning her arm close to her body at an angle that immediately reduced the pain to something manageable. She didn't help him. She didn't resist him either. When he finished, he stood up and said nothing about it. No expectation, no waiting for thanks. He simply moved to the table, sat down, and began eating what was left of whatever he'd had for dinner, cold, unhurried, as if two orc strangers in his cabin were an entirely unremarkable development. Vraka looked at her arm, then at him. The brace was good work. Firm, clean, the right tension. He'd done it in under 2 minutes, without asking her to explain herself or justify being injured or being there at all. She didn't say thank you, but she moved away from the wall and sat in the other chair. The fire had burned down to embers when Vraka decided to leave. It was the practical choice. Sari was breathing steadily on the small cot Edrin had pulled from the back room, wrapped in wool blankets, colour returning slowly to her face. The crisis had passed. There was no longer a reason to stay inside a stranger's home in a village that would not want them there come morning. Vraka stood, moved to the cot, and checked Sari's forehead with the back of her good hand. Fever. Not the dangerous kind, but real. Warm enough that moving her through cold night air was not something Vraka was willing to do. She straightened up and stood there in the dark, caught between the only two options she had, neither of them good. A floorboard creaked behind her. She turned, hand moving toward the knife at her hip on instinct. Edrin stood in the doorway to the back room, fully dressed, holding a clay cup. He looked at her hand near the knife and then at her face, and did neither of the things most people did. He didn't step back, and he didn't try to show her he wasn't afraid. He just held out the cup. "Fever's up," he said quietly, so as not to wake Sari. "I heard you move. Made more tea." Vraka didn't take the cup immediately. "We'll leave at first light," she said. "All right. We're not your responsibility. I know. Then why? Because she has a fever and it's below freezing outside, he said, the same flat, weatherless tone he used for everything. That's all. No other reason. He set the cup on the small table near the cot when she didn't take it, then moved to the fireplace and added a log without being asked. The embers caught slowly, throwing orange light back across the room. Vraka sat down on the floor beside Sari's cot, not in the chair. The floor felt more honest somehow, less like settling in, more like standing guard in a different position. Edren sat in the chair instead, leaned back and closed his eyes. She studied his face in the firelight, the lines around his mouth, the particular kind of tiredness that didn't come from one bad night, but from many. There was something in the set of his jaw that she recognized without being able to say why. "You should sleep," he said, eyes still closed. "I don't sleep in unfamiliar places. Neither did I once." A pause. "Then I got tired enough." Vraka said nothing. The fire settled. Sari breathed. Outside, the wind moved through the pines in long, slow waves that sounded almost like the river. Almost, but not quite. Morning came grey and unhurried. Sari's fever had broken some time before dawn. Vraka knew because she hadn't slept and had been checking every hour, the back of her hand to her sister's forehead, counting the small, reliable fact of her breathing. Edren had slept in the chair. He woke without drama, looked at Sari, looked at Vraka, and went to make breakfast without saying good morning. Vraka appreciated that more than she would have appreciated the words. They ate in silence. Porridge, plain, with something sweet stirred in that Vraka didn't recognize but didn't ask about. Sari slept through it. Afterward, Edren took his coat from the hook by the door. "I have work," he said. "Workshop's out back. You need anything, knock." He left. Vraka sat with the empty bowls and the quiet and the strange, uncomfortable feeling of being in a place where nothing was being asked of her. She found him at midday. The workshop was exactly what the cabin was, small, honest, smelling of fresh wood and iron. He was planing a plank with long, even strokes, his back to the door, and he didn't stop when she came in. She stood for a moment, then, "You said something, at the river." She kept her voice level. "That you'd stood there before and hadn't moved fast enough." The planing stopped. He set the tool down slowly and turned around. His expression didn't close off the way she expected. He just looked at her with that steady, tired openness she still hadn't found the name for. "My daughter," he said. 6 years ago. She was 5. He paused. "Different part of the river. Shallower. I was 20 meters away, and I thought I had time to get my boots off." Vraka said nothing. "By the time I reached her," he stopped, started again differently. She was 4 days from her 6th birthday. The workshop was very quiet. Outside, wind moved through the pines. "I'm sorry," Vraka said. The words felt insufficient, and she knew it and said them anyway. Edren nodded once, not dismissing the condolence, just receiving it without making more of it than it was. "When I heard the splash yesterday," he said, "I didn't think, I just went. I think I've been waiting 4 years to go." Vraka understood that. The way guilt finds its shape not in what you did, but in what you would do differently. The way you carry a rehearsed version of a moment that already passed, waiting for a chance to run it again correctly. She had her own version of that. A 4-year-old girl with a cloth doll. "We both made choices that cost us something," she said quietly. Edren looked at her for a long moment. "Yes, da," he said. "We did. They came in the afternoon. 3 men and a woman, which was enough to feel like a delegation and not enough to feel like a coincidence. Vraka heard them before she saw them. Boots on frozen ground, the particular rhythm of people who have agreed on something before arriving. She was outside the cabin, splitting kindling one-handed. More to have something to do than out of necessity. She straightened up and waited. The man in front was broad, grey-bearded, with the permanent squint of someone who spent his life outdoors resenting it. He stopped at a distance that was technically respectful and practically hostile. "Edren," he called toward the cabin. Idrun came to the door. He took in the four of them and stepped outside, pulling the door mostly closed behind him. "Aldrich," he said, "heard you brought orcs into your house. I brought 2 people in out of the cold. One of them nearly drowned." Aldrich's jaw worked. "That's not really the point." "What is the point?" "The point," the woman behind him said, stepping forward, "is that we don't know them. We don't know why they're here or where they came from or what they want. They want their sister to recover from a fever," Edrin said. "Same as anyone would." Vraka stayed where she was, kindling in her good hand, watching. She had been in enough tense situations to know when to move and when stillness was the stronger position. This was a stillness moment. Aldrich looked at her directly for the first time. "You," he said. "Where are you headed?" "North," she answered. "From where?" "Far enough south that it doesn't concern you." His eyes narrowed. "Everything in this village concerns me." "Aldrich." Edrin's voice had changed, not louder, just final, the way a door sounds when it's actually closed. "They're staying until the girl is well enough to travel. That's my house and my decision. Your decision affects all of us. 2 people resting for 2 days affects nothing." He looked at all 4 of them evenly. "If anyone has a real concern, they can bring it to me directly. But coming to my door as a group to pressure me into putting a sick girl back out in the cold, that I won't discuss." Silence. Aldrich looked at Vraka once more. She met it without expression, without challenge, simply present and immovable in the way that large, calm things are immovable. He turned and left. The others followed. Edrin stood in the doorway until they were gone. Then he looked at Vraka. She looked back at him. "That will cost you," she said. "Probably," he agreed. He went back inside without explaining why he'd done it anyway. He didn't need to. Sari declared herself recovered the following morning by standing up, folding her blankets with precise, unnecessary neatness, and asking if there was anything to eat. Vraka, who had been watching her sleep with the focused attention of someone guarding something irreplaceable, felt something unknot in her chest that she hadn't realized was still tied. "Sit down," she said. "I'm fine. You had a fever 12 hours ago, and now I don't." Sari smiled, the full, unguarded kind that she'd never learned to ration. "Is there food or not?" Edrin made soup. Nothing elaborate. Root vegetables, dried meat, whatever the end of autumn had left in his stores. But he made enough for 3 without being asked, and set 3 plates on the table without remarking on it, and that small, unremarked act sat in the room with a weight that the soup itself didn't have. Sari sat across from Edrin and studied him with the open curiosity she applied to everything. "You live alone?" she asked. "Sari," Vraka said. "It's all right," Edrin said. "Yes, alone." For long?" 4 years. Sari considered this with the seriousness she gave to things that genuinely puzzled her. "That seems hard." "You get used to it." "Vraka says that about everything hard," Sari said. "I don't think it's always true." Edrin glanced at Vraka. Vraka looked at her soup. "Your sister is probably right," he said. They ate. The fire was going well, and the cabin was warm, and outside the wind had dropped to something almost gentle. Sari asked Edrin about the carvings on the workshop door, small, careful animals worked into the wood, and he explained them with the brief, reluctant warmth of someone who doesn't talk about their work often, but finds it comes out anyway when asked correctly. A fox, because his daughter had liked foxes. He said it simply, and then moved on, and Sari let him, which was the right thing to do, and Vraka noted that her sister was sometimes wiser than she looked. After the soup, Sari helped clear the plates without being asked. Edrin accepted the help without making a thing of it. They moved around the small kitchen with the slightly careful choreography of people still learning where the other one stands. Vraka stayed at the table. She looked at the 3 empty plates, the mismatched chairs pulled close, the fire throwing light evenly across all of it. She had eaten in war camps and in forests and once in a ditch during a rainstorm. She had eaten alone more times than she could count. She couldn't remember the last time a meal had felt like something other than fuel. She picked up her cup and held the warmth in both hands. Outside, a fox crossed the tree line and disappeared. They could have left that morning. Sari was recovered. The fever was gone. The color was back. She had eaten 2 bowls of porridge and was already looking toward the tree line with the restlessness of someone ready to move. The road north was waiting. There was no practical reason to stay. Vraka stood outside the cabin with her pack on her good shoulder and told herself she was saying goodbye. Edrin was at the woodpile, splitting logs with the unhurried rhythm of someone filling the hours. He didn't stop when she approached. She waited until he did. He set the axe down and looked at her. "The shoulder," he said. "Another 3 days before you put real weight on it. I know. You'll ignore that. Probably." He almost smiled. Almost. "At least keep the brace on." Vraka looked at him for a moment. The grey morning light made everything look like it was still deciding what it wanted to be. "Why did you help us?" she said. "The real reason, not the river." Edrin was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. "Because nobody was going to," he said finally. "And I've spent 4 years being the kind of man who arrives too late. I didn't want another 4 years of that." Vraka nodded slowly. Behind her she heard Sari come out of the cabin and stop, reading the situation with that quiet accuracy she pretended not to have. "We have nowhere specific to go," Vraka said. The words cost something. She said them anyway. "North is a direction, not a destination." "I know," Edrin said. "The village doesn't want us here. The village doesn't get a vote on what happens in my house." Somewhere in the pines, a bird called once and went quiet. Vraka set her pack down. Not permanently, not with any declaration. Just set it in the frozen dirt beside the woodpile and picked up the second axe leaning against the stack and looked at him. "Show me how you want it split," she said. Edrin looked at the axe, at her, at the pack on the ground. He picked up his own axe and turned to the woodpile. "Smaller than you think," he said. "The wood here is dense. You don't need force. You need placement. Show me." He showed her. Sari sat on the cabin steps and watched them work in the grey morning light, the orc warrior learning to split wood one-handed, and the carpenter who had stopped arriving too late, moving in the easy silence of people who have decided, without saying so, that this is where they are. Nobody said anything about staying. Nobody said anything about leaving either. The fire inside was still burning. The blood makes you orc. The pain makes you human. But choosing to build, that is what makes you family.